More and more of these stories are coming out in these forced birther states where women actually wanted these pregnancies and they're being harmed by their forced birther policies. Women in these forced birther states that voted with these Republicans need to hear these stories because they seem to think that mammortion care and miscarriage care is only for women who are loose and lascivious and those other women over there. But maybe we just need to highlight more women that look like them. I am going to do this article. It's titled When Pregnancy Turned to Miscarriage. Woman says Georgia's mammortion laws delayed the care she needed. But before I do that, I want to highlight how extremely dangerous it is for Black women to have children in this country. Our maternal mortality rate is so much higher than other women's at 49 point, and this is in 2022 before Roe v. Wade was overturned. It was 49.5 deaths per 100,000 live births. For white women, is 19 deaths per live birth. That's more than 2.5 times that of white women. For Hispanic women, it's 16.9 deaths per 100,000 live births. And for Asian women, is much lower. Asian women are the lowest at 13.2. This is really high for a supposed first world country, but we don't give a damn about women in this country. But factors that contribute to the racial disparities for Black women include variation in healthcare quality, underlying chronic conditions, structural racism, and implicit biases. So I'm doing these stories of these white women that are having complications in this world because when it's just Black women dying, no one gives a damn. So maybe we have to talk about white women having complications. Avery Davis Bell was 18 weeks pregnant with a little boy. The 34-year-old woman who lives in Atlanta, Georgia, is already a mother of a 3-year-old who could not stop watching the Daniel Tiger special on becoming a big brother. Bell and her husband Julian had dreamed about the family they would build since they got together at 19 and 20 years old. On October 17th, Bell found herself lying in a hospital bed as blood hemorrhaged from her body in dinner plate sized clots. Amniotic fluid began to leak as she approached her 20th hour of waiting for life saving medical care. Bell was suffering a second trimester miscarriage as she said her medical team at Emory Decatur delayed treatment, navigating her care around Georgia's strict mammortion laws. Your baby is dead or dying inside you. You're just waiting to crash, Bell told USA Today days after she received a life-saving D&E or dilation and evacuation. And I wanted to live, of course, for myself and for my existing child. And the baby wasn't going to live no matter what. So she says that she always wanted 2 children. And here she is at 16 weeks pregnant. Bell, who holds a doctorate in genetics and genomics from Harvard Medical School, and her husband, an MIT graduate, lived in Boston for 7 years. But moving back to her hometown of Atlanta in 2020 was part of their family planning process. They wanted to be close to relatives, which trumped fears she already had about the state's possible heartbeat bill, which was already on the table as early as 2019 before the 2022 Dobbs decision overturned the federal right to a mammortion. In November 2022, however, Georgia did pass a strict 6-week ban called the Life Act, which criminalized most terminations after 6 weeks of gestation, minus some exceptions, including medically futile pregnancies in emergencies to save the life of the mother in cases of rape and incest, though only if officially reported to and documented by police. After the Dobbs decision, states have enacted a range of laws from near total bans to shield laws protecting patients from other states who travel to get the procedure. Doctors and families have left states like Georgia and Idaho in wake of the decision, but she and her husband chose to stay. After settling into a home in the Atlanta suburb of Decatur, the couple welcomed their first child, a son, in the summer of 2021. My older child, my only child, she corrected after a heavy pause, is a complete joy. And my husband and I have always wanted kids. We are both people who wanted to be parents since childhood, and we have always wanted 2 children. Bell and her husband carefully planned the timing of their second pregnancy, waiting until the summer before their son turned 3 years old to begin trying for the next. In July, she found out she was expecting again, but the pregnancy wouldn't be routine. At around 7 weeks gestation, ultrasound revealed that Bell had a subchorionic hemorrhage or subchorionic hematoma. This occurs when blood forms between the wall of the uterus and the chorionic membrane, or the outermost layer separating the amniotic sac from the wall of the uterus during pregnancy, according to the Cleveland Clinic. The bleeding is a result of the chorion membrane detaching from the wall of the uterus. Subchorionic hematomas are the most common cause of vaginal bleeding in patients between 10 and 20 weeks gestation, making up about 11% of the cases, according to the National Library of Medicine. However, the majority of these occurrences resolve on their own without causing any further complications or requiring intervention. When reviewed on imaging, Bell's bleed presented a significantly larger than is usually expected with subchorionic hematomas, which tend to be small and produce light vaginal bleeding, if any at all. She continued to return to the doctor for testing every 2 weeks, and the hemorrhage was looking stable. By the time she reached her second trimester, Bell said things were looking good. She was beginning to show and tell friends and family more broadly about the pregnancy. They also told their 3 year old he was going to have a sibling. He was so excited about the baby. Every time he would see me, he'd give me a big hug. He'd say, "Hug, mama, hug, baby." He totally got it. And he would pat my stomach and say, "Touch, baby." The ticking of a mandated 24-hour clock. By 16 weeks, she was again experiencing bleeding so heavy that doctors became concerned about her low hemoglobin levels, which were continuing to trend downward. She was in and out of the hospital and ultimately put on bed rest. She only broke that bed rest, she said, the same day she later ended up in the hospital for the final time. She did so to cast her early vote in the presidential election in person. In November, abortion measures will be on the ballots in 10 states. Here she is with her "I voted" picture. The final time she was admitted, doctors became increasingly concerned about the heavy bleeding. One of the main concerns for my health and safety was that I would go into a blood crisis or a hemolytic crisis. And at that point, they would basically need to terminate the pregnancy to save my life. This was also when they brought up that in Georgia, they could not consider that until it was the case of life or death for me. And they basically said, "We have to talk about this because we're in Georgia." And in Georgia, like the other forced birther states, they really have to consider the legal ramifications when deciding when to intervene for a woman's life or if this is even a viable pregnancy. Bell and her doctors determined that a D&E, or dilation and evacuation procedure, was the best course of action. A D&E is a procedure used for termination past the first trimester or after a miscarriage to remove remaining tissue. It involves the dilation of the cervix and surgical evacuation of tissue from the uterus and is typically performed using aspiration and surgical tools. Bell said her doctors felt the procedure was the best medical decision because they could control the bleeding and keep me alive. At this point, we're not going to get to meet my baby. According to Bell, her baby still had cardiac activity, but described it as a slow end to the pregnancy that definitely ended. Despite the heavy bleeding, Bell said she still had to be consented for a termination, and the medical staff said her condition was not considered emergent enough to forego a 24-hour waiting period mandated in Georgia. When asked about termination care at its hospitals, Emory Healthcare gave USA Today the following statement. Emory Healthcare uses consensus from clinical experts, medical literature, and legal guidance to support our providers as they make individualized treatment recommendations in compliance with Georgia's termination laws. Our top priorities continue to be the safety and well-being of the patients we serve. Bell described a situation in which her medical team was confused about how to care for her without getting into legal trouble. They were trying to get the paperwork signed so they could start the clock. If my life is definitely at risk, they could do it. But where that line is a little hard, and my doctors, rightly, they don't really want to wait until you're definitely dying to save you. And this isn't a choice they should have to have. Bell said doctors grappled with when they could start the process of the procedure. It would take time for her cervix to dilate, but it was unclear to the medical team if beginning the dilation itself would be considered advancing a termination before the necessary time was up. All of this stuff that I shouldn't have to think about, and they shouldn't have had to think about. They should have said, whatever is the safest thing, let's start it now, and they couldn't do that. She says she was transferred to another hospital better equipped to handle her case, Emory Midtown, via an ambulance. She and her husband spent their Friday waiting on doctors who were trying to figure out when I could have my surgery. After another set of tests were run, it was discovered that Bill's hemoglobin had dropped so low that it was hovering just about the level where an automatic transfusion would be necessary. Because of that, they were able to move up the surgery and not wait until the following day, though this still had to be approved by a committee the hospital designed specifically to review procedures to ensure that they do not step afoul of the state's new laws. A spokesperson for Emory declined to provide further clarity or answer additional questions about the committee or its process. Bell required a blood transfusion during surgery and has had 2 iron transfusions since. She is still seeing a hematologist and will likely need more infusions to help her fully recover from the lasting anemia. Doctors told her it would take 6 months for her body to get back to baseline. Whew. All right. So the fact that they have to go through all of this is simply wild. But this is Georgia. This is a forced birther state. And while we're talking about Georgia, here's another case, but this one didn't hit the news. So this woman posted her niece. She says, healing prayers for my beautiful niece. She's 19. She had a miscarriage 3 weeks ago in the metro Atlanta, Georgia area. She's on a breathing tube tonight. They didn't do a D&C, but they say she's okay there. She's being tested for meningitis tomorrow. Please send healing love and prayers for my baby girl, Haley. So this is Haley. Haley is having a miscarriage in a forced birther state. So this is the aunt doing an update. She says, my niece is seriously damaged from the lack of medical intervention after a miscarriage. She's in a coma in Atlanta, Georgia. Trump's laws are unaliving women. Edit. The hospital currently caring for her is not the one that helped create this madness. And another update from the aunt saying, update on Haley. My heart is broken and it's hard to think. I re-recorded this about 30 times. Thank you for your love and kindness. I'll update again when there's news. Please vote knowing that women are dying under these laws that Trump helped reverse and these states that instituted these deadly laws. In this video, she's talking about how they finally took her, I think she's out of the coma, and they took out the breathing tube and put in a trach. If you're on TikTok, go over to this woman's page. You can watch the videos over there where she's talking. If you're on my YouTube page, I'm just going to attach it to the back end of this. So go over to Trust Loves Harmony to watch the video if you're on TikTok. I just wanted to show that some of these stories are coming out in the news, but there are going to be so many more stories in these forced birther states with young women, girls who are raped, and older women that are facing hardships, death, losing organs, and all of that because of these laws and these forced birther bans. Join the conversation. Let me know what you think. Don't forget to like, comment, and please share these stories.
Update on my niece Haley. They removed the breathing tube today and replaced it with a trach. She's had brain hemorrhaging, so she's got severe brain damage. She has severe sepsis. The prognosis is not good at all. Haley went to the hospital on September 30th on her 12th week date of being pregnant. She had a miscarriage. They kept her in the hospital for 4 days because her potassium and other electrolytes were extremely low. She could not hold down fluids or food. They sent her home, still unable to hold down fluids and food, and her potassium was still low. They did not perform a D&C. They told her she didn't need one. The next 2 weeks, I watched as her cognition got worse. I watched her get sicker. I watched her get weak. Well, watched as in FaceTime, because I live in D.C. She lives south of Atlanta. I begged and pleaded with her to go back to the hospital, but I think she thought I was being overprotective. She's 19. She didn't understand how dangerous this actually was. And this is not her fault. She didn't know. There were doctors and nurses that knew, that should have done their job to help her. When Haley went back to the hospital, she had expelled the infected tissue with blood and other fluids, and she was vomiting blood. She's now on life support. Thank you to everyone that has sent your love and prayers. And thank you for being warriors of love and standing up for the sacredness of this time against the people that would come on and say anything negative. I truly appreciate you. Keep sending love to all the women. We've got to support each other. Thank you.
Here's how long you'd have to work dangerous occupations to equal the same level of risk as a black woman faces to have one child. As you may know, according to the CDC, the maternal mortality rate for non-Hispanic black women was 69.9 per 100,000. That's more than twice the maternal mortality for the average woman and 3 times the maternal mortality rate for white women. But let's compare that to some of the most dangerous jobs in the United States. In 2021, there was about 129 officers killed. That puts their mortality rate at about 19.5. That means that a police officer would have to spend 3 years and 7 months in field work just to equal the same level of risk as a black woman faces to have one child. Next, let's look at firefighters. In 2020, there were about 1,041,200 firefighters in the United States. According to FEMA, about 102 of them lost their lives, which resulted in a mortality rate of about 9.8. That means that a firefighter would have to work about 7 years and 1 month to equal the same level of risk as black women face just to have one child. Now let's look at construction workers. According to BLS, their mortality rate was about 3.6 for every 100,000 workers. And that means that a construction worker would have to work 19 years and 5 months to have the same level of risk on the job as the average black woman faces to have one child. Okay, but what about soldiers? According to the U.S. Army, in 2021, the on-ground deployment mortality rate was about 1.3 per every 100,000. That means a United States soldier would have to spend 53 years and 8 months on deployment to equal the same level of risk as a black woman faces to have, you guessed it, one child. Here's a couple of just miscellaneous other things. You can double check my work if you want to. A skydiver would have to perform around 64 jumps to equal the same level of risk as a black woman faces to have one child. With car accidents, the deadliest cause of unnatural death in the United States, you would have to be in 52 car accidents to equal the same level of risk as a black woman faces to have one child. And the last example I'm going to show in this video is bungee jumping. You would have to jump 350 times to have the same risk as a black woman faces to have one child. Giving birth is more dangerous than nearly every job in the United States, and it's 3 times more dangerous for black women. It's the single most dangerous thing that Americans will have to do in their lifetimes, so it should be voluntary. And as I said in that last video, if men won't listen to women who say this, maybe they'll listen to a grizzled white dude who says to listen to women.